Hi Choral Rangers. Today I was going to originally be teaching you about the contrapuntal textures that we find typically in four-voice choral arrangements. But when I looked ahead at the final project that we have for our semester, I noticed that we do not need to be using any contrapuntal textures in that project. We will just be using homophonic textures. And so I've decided that rather than spend a lot of time talking about the contrapuntal textures in four-voice arrangements, I thought I would spend today's lecture going over the final project, the one that will be due during final exams week, in kind of depth and in some detail, so that you can get a good idea of what you need to do and what you need to prepare for this final project. What I have here on the screen to start off with is a copy of the handout that I'm going to give you with all of the information you need to know about the final project. In fact, as you read this, or as you watch this video, you may be able to already have this document open in front of you and have read it already. In fact, it would probably be a good idea if you have this document opened up and or printed out so you can refer to it as I go back and forth between this document and a few other documents. So just to let you know, the final project here, which is due during finals week, and by the way, I've got it scheduled to be due the last day of finals week. That would be Friday, May 8th. Friday, May 8th, I believe, is the correct date for that. And the objective, of course, is to arrange the melody, a melody for SATB voices and piano accompaniment. Now, the melody I'd like you to arrange for their final project is going to be This Little Light of Mine. I don't know if that is familiar to you or if you have heard it before, but what I'm going to do is I'm going to give you a handout with the melody, with all of the text you need, and including all of the harmonies that you need as well. And I'll also be giving you, I believe I should be sending you through Canvas, a recording of this, of an arrangement, my arrangement, so that you can at least get kind of the feel or the idea of how the tune goes. Let's take a look at some of the steps of the project summary, and yeah, then we'll go ahead and dive into this in a little more detail. So first of all, some of the opening summary points here are the same as they've been for some of the prior projects this semester. I'd like you to arrange this Little Light of Mine at a difficulty level appropriate for high school or college choir. And as the other projects, I'd like for it to be about 22 to 26 measures long. That's a good range, I think, for these projects that have 4 vocal phrases and usually an introduction and an ending. I only want you to set the one verse that I'm going to show you on the handout. And this one happens to be in the key of G major, and so I want you to stay in G major for the entirety of your arrangement. You do not need to change key at all. Okay. A couple things that I'll get to, and then I'll show you with some more concrete examples in a moment. Letter E says I want you to include, as typical, a 4-measure introduction to this arrangement for piano only. And I want this introduction to be derived from the first phrase of the melody. So the 4-measure introduction just for piano, and I want it to be derived or related to the very first vocal phrase, or the first phrase of the melody, however you want to say it. Okay. After that, you also will need to include a 4-measure ending for all 4 voices that repeats the last phrase of the melody. As with the last project, the repetition doesn't have to be exact, but the last phrase of the melody must be recognizable in your ending. So I'm going to want you to tack on a 4-measure ending after the vocal phrases, the melody has been completed. And the 4-measure ending is again supposed to be basically a repeat of the last phrase of the melody of the tune. Okay. Piano-wise, speaking, accompaniment-wise, letter G says, I'd like you to use either a chordal and arpeggiated accompaniment styles, or I'd like you to use an arpeggiated style throughout, but you would need to choose then 2 different rhythmic elaboration patterns for that arpeggiated style. Okay. So if I scroll down to the graph, you'll notice that the body of the melody is 4 4-bar phrases, as all of our other projects have been. There's going to be an introduction of 4 measures for piano only. There's going to be an ending for the voices and piano, if you'd like, for 4 measures. And then we were starting, we mentioned that the key is G major throughout the whole piece. And we started talking about the piano accompaniment. Now, I said that you may either use, you may choose to use chordal piano accompaniment and arpeggiation styles. And that would be either you use the chordal style here and the arpeggiation style here in the second half, or vice versa. The other option for piano accompaniment is to use an arpeggiated style throughout, but choose one rhythmic elaboration pattern for the first half of the piece, and then another rhythmic elaboration pattern for the second half of the piece. I'd like to give you options. I don't want this to be absolutely nailed down, so you have no creative freedom or artistic freedom. So I want to give you options within the confines of what we've talked about this semester and what you know how to do. Letter F says for you to include a, well, we talked about the 4-measure ending, never mind. Let me skip down to letter H. For the first 2 phrases of the melody, I'd like you to give the sopranos the main melody, and I'd like you to give a background vocal texture to the alto, tenor, and bass. Now again, I talked about the background vocal texture with a melody the last lecture. It is considered one of the homophonic textures in 4-part arranging. And so remember to give the soprano the main melody, and then a background vocal texture to the 3 lower voices, the alto, tenor, and bass. And this is for just the first 2 phrases of the tune. Okay. For the 3rd phrase of the tune, I'd like you to move the melody to a voice other than the soprano voice. And at that time, I want you to provide a note-against-note texture for the remaining voices. Okay. So for the 3rd phrase again, I want you to give the melody to a voice other than the soprano, such as the alto, the tenor, or the bass. And then the remaining voices are going to provide a note-against-note harmonic texture for that melody. Finally, for the 4th phrase and the ending, I'd like you to return the melody to the soprano voice and use either of the vocal textures that we just talked about for anything that you used prior, either the first 2 phrases or the 3rd phrase. So again, the 4th phrase and the ending, return the melody to the soprano voice, and then if you want to use note-against-note texture in the other voices, or if you want to use a background vocal texture in the other voices for the ending, that is perfectly fine. I'll leave that up to you. Okay? What I have on the screen at the moment is a look at the handout, one of the handouts that I'm going to send you through Canvas. This is probably the handout you want to start with as you prepare your arrangement. What this is it is a notation of the melody. It gives you the text of the only verse that you need to set. And I've also given you some chords that you can use so you don't have to come up with your own harmonies. I know we're kind of moving along here, getting towards the end of the semester, and just to save you a little time, what I've done is I've written the pop symbols for the harmonic progressions and the harmonic structure I would like you to use to harmonize this little light of mine. Up on the top left and the top right of this handout, I've told you exactly where phrase 1, 2, 3, 4, and the ending phrase are on this handout. Please be aware, however, that when I actually, when you look at my model, my arrangement of it, my measure numbers will not be exactly like these measure numbers, because in my arrangement I have 4 measures of piano introduction before this, before the main melody starts. Okay. But at least these measure numbers here give you an indication as to what phrase is what when you're just looking at the melody by itself, along with the text and the harmonies for it. Okay. So again, I will be emailing this, I'll be uploading this to you, sending it to you through Canvas. You have everything you need to here, chords, you have text, you have notes, and this is where the ending starts that we talked about on the assignment sheet, the ending that's going to be a repeat of the last phrase of the melody. And when you get this and you print it out or you look at it, I'm sure it will make a lot more sense to you. So, on this graph here on the assignment sheet for the project, the vocal texture, we have talked about above how the first texture should be the soprano with the main melody and then a background vocal texture for the alto, tenor, and bass voices. Okay, that will be the background. Soprano melody and background vocal textures through here. Then for phrase 3, you want to move the melody to a voice other than the soprano voice and use a note against note texture. And then for phrase 4 and for the ending, you can use either vocal texture that you have used prior to that. Now, a couple pointers for the first vocal texture. When you have the melody in the soprano and the rest of the voices are giving you a background texture, I want you to either use a neutral syllable for the text of the background voices, or I want you to use text fragment that has been derived from or comes from the text of the main melody. It's your choice, either a neutral syllable or you can choose to use a text fragment that comes from the text of the main melody. When you get to phrase 3 and you're using a note against note texture, that means all the voices are going to be in the same rhythm and all the voices can sing the same text at the same time. Here at the end of towards the end of the piece, if you want to continue using note against note texture, that is fine. All the voices can sing the same text at the same time. If you want to go back to a background vocal texture in phrase 4 and for the ending, then what you can do is you can again use a neutral syllable for the background voices to sing, or you can use a text fragment, once again derived from the text of the main melody at that point. So what I'm going to do at this time is I'm going to show you the sections of my arrangement of this little light of mine, show you how they fit together according to the instructions we just looked at, and then after that, or maybe even during, I can go ahead and play these passages so you can see how they all fit together into a unified whole. So what you're seeing right now at the beginning is the first 4 measures. And we know that we need an introduction for piano only, a 4-measure piano introduction, and that's exactly what I have here. I put some comments on this file, and it just basically describes what I'm describing for you in the lecture and on the assignment sheet. Here's a 4-measure introduction for piano only that is derived from the first phrase of the melody. So when I play this introduction, you should be able to hear the beginning part of the melody, of the main melody. Let's see if we can go ahead and hear that. So there you have it. We have the introduction. You can hear it's got the melody from the beginning of the actual tune itself, and it's for piano only. Moving on then, we'll get to the first phrase of the melody, or where the voices come in. And what I decided to use for a piano accompaniment was I decided to use a arpeggiated accompaniment texture, or an arpeggiated accompaniment style right at the beginning. Okay? So I have actually some harmonic tones or chord tones in the right hand of the piano, but in the left hand of the piano I have the chordal arpeggiations. Chordal arpeggiations. Okay? Here for the SATB voices, what I have is, as we talked about, I have the main melody in the soprano voice, that's right up here, and I've given the alto, tenor, and bass voices a background vocal texture. A background vocal texture. You can see that I've given the sopranos with the melody a loud or a forte dynamic level, but I've given softer dynamic levels to the alto, tenor, and bass background voices. I personally did not decide to use a neutral syllable for them to sing, the background voices to sing. What I decided to use was a text fragment derived from the text of the main melody. And so, while the main melody is singing "This Little Light of Mine, I'm Gonna Let It Shine," the background voices are singing "This light of mine, gonna let it shine." Okay. And then let me go to the second phrase first, and we'll look at that, and then I'll play these two vocal phrases. The second vocal phrase is more of the same. Don't need to change anything from the first vocal phrase. Sopranos still have the melody, still have the background vocal texture in the alto, tenor, and bass voices, and I still have the arpeggiated piano accompaniment style down there in the keyboard part. So let's listen to these two vocal phrases. Moving right along, let's go to the third phrase where the instructions ask for some changes. So here in the third phrase, the instructions ask for some changes, and I've gone ahead and done that. What I have done is I have moved the melody from the soprano voice to the alto voices. So in the third vocal phrase of this piece, I've given the melody to the alto voice, and there it is right there. Okay. Meanwhile, what I've done with the remaining voices, according to the directions, I have a note against note texture going on in the remaining voices. So you can see that the sopranos are singing, tenors and basses, they're all singing the same rhythm, not necessarily the same notes, but the same rhythm as the melody, which is in the alto. And therefore, all four voices can sing the same text at the same time. While this is going on, in the piano accompaniment, I have shifted from an arpeggiated accompaniment style to a chordal accompaniment style. See, I decided not to use the arpeggiated style throughout and choose different rhythmic elaborations. What I decided to use was the chordal and arpeggiated styles, one in one half and one in the other half. So here's my chordal arpeggiated, or here's my chordal style, not arpeggiated style right here. So let's go, I know it's brief, but let's listen to the third phrase because of the change. And then the fourth phrase and the ending will go back to some things that have already been used before.